I created a sample survey on fan fiction so that we could look at the results of our survey. To start, I selected a discipline, which was literature, and then after reviewing 3 journals and 12 abstracts, I narrowed my topic to fan fiction and selected 3 scholarly peer-reviewed articles. The first article argued that fan fiction was written by women and that they are not financially compensated for their work. The second article argued that fan fiction has a positive impact on student readers' success in formal education. The third article argued that fan fiction is a major source of new language creation. I also reviewed popular sources on the topic and found 3 that stuck out to me. One argued that fan fiction from the 1700s was as graphic as modern fan fiction. The second defined fan fiction as amateurs retelling existing stories, and it used examples that predate the Bible, examples from the Bible, and examples from the greatest lit of all time to argue that even though fan fiction can be dismissed as crass or derivative, it's actually an important source of content and is the major source of e-publications. And the third argued that fan fiction was created mostly by people who didn't see themselves represented in the stories or who were bored by major canon franchises and wanted to take ownership from professional writers and write themselves into the stories. So the patterns that stuck out to me across those 6 sources were that there were a number of different definitions of fan fiction, but that all the sources seemed to be supporting the readers and writers of fan fiction. So that made me wonder if there was some sort of negative opinion, generally speaking, toward fan fiction and toward the people who read and write it, and if that would come through in my survey results. I also wondered if people would have the same kind of range of definitions of fan fiction. And a number of the articles also discussed gender. So I wanted to look at that in my survey results as well. So here's what the survey looks like for the people who are taking the survey. This is the survey I created because I wanted to look at gender. I asked the question about gender identity. I asked about level of education. And then I asked about experience with fan fiction because I wanted to know if exposure to readers or writers or the genre would impact people's opinion of it. I asked for the definition of fan fiction so that I could see if there were a number of different definitions. And I asked if they had experience reading it, what their opinion was, what they thought about the quality of it, and how strongly they felt about fan fiction. So once you've shared your survey and people have responded to your survey, this is what the survey looks like when you open it. You can see up here that you have responses. We have 11 responses. To review the responses, click on Response. And the summary is where you are taken first. If you don't want to accept responses anymore, you can close this so that you're not accepting responses anymore. Or if you still have people who are responding, you can leave it open. When you scroll down, you'll see all the answers in one place. So what is your field? What's your major, or where do you work? Here are our answers for our 11 responses. The forms usually drops things into graphics for us if we narrow them down to choices. So we can see that our gender results, we have male, 45%, 5 of our 11 respondents are male, 45%, 5 of our 11 respondents are female, and 1% would rather not say. Current level of education, same thing. Experience with fan fiction. These you would read through, and the other ones you can just look at the results. So you can get some information from the summary. And if you wanted to take a screenshot because you wanted to use an image in a presentation or a paper, you could take a screenshot of this if you wanted to discuss gender representation. The more useful option is to create a spreadsheet. Create a new spreadsheet. Yes, over on the top right, you hit create. Now all of the responses transfer to Google Sheets, which is what we use for gridding. So you'll be able to see everything here. Once you're in Google Sheets, you can play around with the content. You usually want to freeze the top row so that you can move the stuff beneath it around. You probably want to select everything and then move up to text wrapping so that you can see things. You can make some things smaller. If an answer is long, you might want to give it more space. Looks like this answer is long for some folks, so we probably want to spread that out. Just helps to see when we're looking at the responses. This one's numerical, so it doesn't need a really big line. Definitions of fan fiction are pretty long. So this way we can see people by majors. Then we get to move it around and see if we can see any patterns. For instance, here we'll see gender. Maybe we want to look at gender and experience together. So first, you can put these in order. There are a number of different ways to do this. The easy one is just to alphabetize things. So now I can see at the top here, you can see my 5 responses from people who identify as female and my 5 responses from people who identify as male. And let's say I wanted to compare that with what is your experience with fan fiction? I've read some, I read it often, I've heard of it, I've read some, none. So we have a wide range of experience across our respondents who identify as female. And then our male responses, I've read some, I've read some, I've read some. So there's a range, but we don't have any responses from males who read it often. In fact, we don't have many people at all in our survey who read this often. So perhaps we also want to look at our majors. We could come over here and say, biomedical sciences, engineering, accounting, theater, chem. Okay, do we start to see different patterns here that we could parse and look at? One that's maybe sticking out is that there are sciences and then there are the arts. So what if we started to wonder how your major impacts or is represented and demonstrated through your feedback? Maybe we would put together the people who are in the biomedical sciences. I've read some, I've heard of it. Sciences, none. Accounting, none. Theater, I've read some. Sciences, I've read some. So again, you may not see any patterns stick out that you want to discuss, but this is how you start to analyze data. You start to parse through and say, okay, do I see a pattern here in education? For our purposes, our questions were, what is the definition of fan fiction? So that's easy. We read through these and see if there are shared definitions. Dive into unexplored avenues, free therapy and daydreaming, superfans writing stories, fans who write about stories they love. So what we could say is that across the 6 sources, the 3 scholarly sources and the 3 popular sources, we noticed that there was not one shared definition of fan fiction. And now that we've looked at this in our survey responses, we see the same thing. There is not one shared definition of fan fiction here. And that's one way we could synthesize our findings with the findings from our 6 sources. The other question we saw appear from looking at our 6 sources was, is there generally a negative opinion of fan fiction? Why are these scholarly sources and popular sources writing in a way that seems to support fan fiction as if it's under attack? So our question was, what is your opinion of fan fiction and what is your opinion of people who write fan fiction? What we didn't ask was a simple yes, no. Do you like fan fiction? Do you have a negative or positive opinion of fan fiction? We could have done that and had a more concrete answer and then followed it up. But we asked this broad question because we knew we weren't going to have a whole lot of results, so we would get to look through it. So let's see. Can't be good. Better than books. I assume it's bad. Seems good, but easier to read than some of the stuff. So we see mixed opinions here. So if we just wanted to make a general claim, we could say that there are mixed opinions represented in our results. However, if we wanted to do a deeper dive into this, we would go through and we could code these. So let's see, I assume it mirrors the quality of people. If our coding wanted to narrow down positive, negative, or neutral, we would read these and we would add that. So I'm going to go through and do that. Okay, so I've coded all of these. And some of them you really have to have context. I assume it is about the same level as comic books. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative, so I had to read the rest to recognize that this response didn't have a positive opinion of fan fiction. So again, if we wanted to put these in order, it's just easier. You can use pivot tables. There are a number of different ways you can do this, but negative, we would just count 1, 3 negative, 2 neutral, 7 positive. So we could say then in our paper and in our interpretation of these results that most of our responses were positive. So that doesn't really match this defensive posturing that we're finding in the other literature. There are a number of different things we could look at here. We could see if the opinion is aligned in any way with impact. The people who have a positive opinion, are they more likely to have had experience with fan fiction? So it's just easier to see this sometimes. What is your experience with fan fiction in positive and negative? You could look gender too and see if some people do more of our female respondents have a negative opinion or a positive opinion. For our purposes, we just want to be able to connect something that we find as a pattern in our results with something that we found in a pattern across the 6. So for the paper, you'll use 3 scholarly peer-reviewed sources and 2 public sources, and then this source. For our example, 2 things that we can take away from this are that we did find that our results mirrored the lack of clear definition for fan fiction. However, we also found that most of our respondents had positive impact of fan fiction. What's important to remember, though, is this is a very limited sample. Everyone said that he, she, they are students, so we really can't extrapolate or generalize this much. And if we wanted to make a larger claim about this, to develop a thesis and then connect that with our other theses through a synthesis, we would really need to read it far more closely and critically to analyze it. Our goal, however, was simply to have some experience with primary research, designing a summary, gathering data, starting to analyze it, and being able to make limited claims. And the claims that we could find, even on our skim of this data, were that, like our 6 sources, this source also demonstrates a positive attitude toward people who read and write fan fiction. And also, like our sources, our data demonstrates that there is a wide range of understanding in relation to the definition of fan fiction. Those two claims we can use as we move toward our paper and start to create a larger synthesis of our material for our analytic exploration.